early in my childhood. I was invited to have a play date. My white friends never had a play date at my home. So I went to Megan's house. The streets were wider. The homes were bigger and brighter. It was obvious that it was the barrier of race that kept us from that because the segregation was race-based.
Even here, Evanston, Illinois, a proudly liberal suburb of Chicago, the barrier and burden of race have long weighed heavy, like a winter storm. Evanston's alderman for the 5th Ward, Robin Rue Simmons, was born and raised in the historically black neighborhood she represents.
This community was redlined historically, and that has come along with damages that continue today. Resources were stripped away from the black community along with wealth as well.
The city's plan to change that? Reparations. An idea long debated, proposed over 150 years ago. First, 40 acres of land, later a mule, for formerly enslaved people to share the American dream built on their backs for free.
We built this nation!
A promise long broken, until now.
This is a historic vote.
Evanston is set to become the first U.S. city to pay out reparations, a total of $10 million, starting with increments of up to $25,000 per person for housing.
I didn't start my elected career even discussing reparations.
So what changed?
I was looking at data, I was looking at what we had done, and reparations was the only answer.
The only answer?
The only answer.
Only answer.
The only, any more of the same was gonna only, at best, help us sustain the oppressed state and the disparity that we have.
Only? That's a big word.
The only legislative response for us to reconcile the damages in the black community is reparations.
Why housing?
Housing specifically and home ownership is a path to begin to build wealth. You know, when you have stable housing, you have an opportunity just to breathe and think about what's next. It provides a sense of place in a community where we're largely renters now and we should be owning.
We anticipate litigation with the premise that you cannot use tax money that's from the public to benefit a particular group of people. But throughout history, taxes were used to benefit a certain group of people while others were excluded from that.
Dino Robinson is the founder of Shorefront, an archive dedicated to chronicling and celebrating black life in Evanston, a richness long undervalued. His documentation going back to the late 1800s, invaluable in measuring the cost of racism and the need for reparations.
Black community members were moving throughout Evanston and forming, pockets in the city of Evanston. And it caused the white community to start panicking, like, what do we do about this?
The response to that panic? Redlining, a federally sanctioned project, assigning market value to neighborhoods, a grading system, A to D.
The D areas were usually relegated to the black community. The area D was always in red.
This deliberately pushed Evanston's black families into an area that became the 5th Ward, segregating them from white families, sought after property, and ultimately, wealth.
Banks in Evanston would not loan to black families. Real estate agencies would not show you anything other than the 5th Ward.
That map still is the map of our concentrated black community, our disinvestment.
Today, white residents of Evanston have nearly double the income and home value of black residents. This racial wealth gap is prevalent nationally, with black Americans possessing less than 15% of the wealth that white Americans have.
I am 98 years old.
We moved to Evanston in 1959.
This is a lot.
Black residents who lived through redlining and their descendants are eligible for reparations. That includes Ben Gaines Sr. and his son, Ben Jr. Ben Sr. grew up in 1920s Dixon, Kentucky, part of the Old South, the business end of an era's most violent weapon against African Americans, Jim Crow. He landed in Evanston. Here, Jim Crow wore a smile, but still inflicted harm on black home buyers.
The contractor, he said, find a lot anywhere in Evanston, and I'll build whatever you want. Well, when he said that, he meant in the black neighborhoods. And we still have these same types of problems.
Uncle Ben is a realist. He calls it like he sees it.
Younger members of Ben Sr.'s family, his grandnephew Jared and his children, Nick and Maya, know a more progressive era.
Growing up in Evanston for me was definitely good, despite the racism that I faced.
Will you apply for the reparations?
I will, yeah.
And why?
Because it's old.
Quote-unquote wealthy African Americans are not the equivalent of quote-unquote wealthy white Americans in this country.
A national reparations policy is a moral, democratic, and economic imperative.
House Resolution 40 is the latest national step toward reparations. Supporters have included Ta-Nehisi Coates and actor Danny Glover.
H.R. 40 was an opportunity to have a commission to study reparations, but also the further context in which we look at slavery and the impact that it had on us.
It seems to me your journey with reparations is America's journey with reparations. You are the grandson of sharecroppers, people who are a generation away from slavery. I wonder if you've ever thought about how might Danny Glover's life have been different if your grandparents, the sharecroppers, had been given the reparations promised to them, had they been given 40 acres and a mule. How might your life have been different?
I never thought about that. You know what I'm saying? I know they did what they could. They made it work with extraordinary belief in the possibility of this country.
So you think Evanston could be an example for the nation?
I think it can. Evanston, Illinois did something that no other city has done. If we're able to use that as a platform, maybe other cities might adopt the whole idea of this.
And other cities could take up Evanston's sweetly ironic funding solution, a 3% tax on newly legal marijuana sales.
It's the most appropriate use for that sales tax. And in our city, 70% of the marijuana arrests were in the black community, and we're 16% of the community. All studies show that blacks and whites consume cannabis at the same rate.
There's been debate over whether those taxes can sustain the fund long term. And even those who proudly support reparations wonder aloud, is $25,000 too little, too late?
It's a drop in the bucket. You have denied me all my 98 years. Hopefully, before I die, I'll see the world change.
Uncle Ben, he's 98, so we can understand his skepticism. Where does your skepticism come from?
I would say it's less like skepticism and more education. People who are acting like they're ready for change, and behind closed doors, other things are happening, right? And we see that all the time in politics.
What does it say that my 25-year-old has to feel like that?
You don't learn about these issues at your high school.
We aren't really taught black history outside of, oh, you know, slaves came from Africa. So part of reparations, it can't just be money. Like, you have to teach us what we need to know.
One could argue it's potentially more symbolic than it is substantive.
I disagree that it's symbolic at all. I understand that $25,000 is life-saving for some families, but relative to the injury, it's not nearly enough, and I get that.
This notion of reparations in Evanston isn't meant to be a drop in the bucket, but the beginning of a stream that becomes a river, that becomes an ocean.
There is a lifetime of work ahead for us to get to justice.
For all of your work in this space, what worries you still?
Not enough resource, not quick enough. I do believe that we're committed as a city, and I can't wait to celebrate the family that receives their first reparation benefit. I cannot wait for that day.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.